I'd like to first of all welcome all the participants to this April talk on stories about the railways, offbeat stories by L Singh. I think L Singh does not require any introduction because he's our very active secretary who has done so much for our society. And of course, apart from being secretary of our society, he's a railwayman who's worked all his life in the railways in India and abroad. And I'm sure he will have very interesting stories to share with all of us. So, Jay, it's all yours.
See, as I've always felt, most of us know, anyone who's a rail enthusiast will know a lot about the railways. But there are many things that happen in the life of a railwayman which never goes outside the railways. So I thought this may be a good idea if I share some of the stories, some of the anecdotes, some true, some not true, some funny, one not so funny, some serious, with all of you, to give you an idea of what happens in the railways other than operations and maintenance of track and locomotives and so on. I started service as a special class railway apprentice of the 1965 batch and joined at Jamalpur as an apprentice in January 1966. In January 1970, I completed my apprenticeship and I was posted as an assistant mechanical engineer on probation and allotted Western Railway. In those days, probation used to be 2 years. Later on, it became 1.5 years. And now I'm not sure with this IRMS coming in, whether probation will remain 1.5 years or 1 year or whether we'll have a probation at all. I'm not sure what the system now will be. But in our time, you were a probationary officer training in various establishments, both in workshops, on your railway, production units for 2 years. And at the end of 2 years, you were posted on a working post. My first working post was as AME Rajkot. Now, although I had already spent 2 years on Western Railway, I still had no idea where Rajkot was. So I had to look up a map to see where Rajkot was, check up timetables to see which train went to Rajkot. And I discovered that the train that went to Rajkot was the Kirti Express from Ahmedabad, which went via Rajkot to Verawal. I landed up at Rajkot early in the morning on the 10th of January and reported to what was then called the DS. Today we called him a DRM, but in those days he used to be called a DS. I reported to the DS's office, found he was not in office, and reported to his secretary. His secretary looked at my posting orders and said, "Congratulations, sir, you are acting DS today." So I said, "How can that be? I'm the junior most assistant officer on the Indian Railways and you say I'm acting DS?" He said, "Yes, you are." I said, "What happened to all the divisional officers?" Incidentally, in those days, the senior DMEs and the senior DOS's posts hadn't come. They were still DMEs only. Anyway, I said, "What's happened to all the divisional officers?" He says, the day before, they had the inauguration of the Viramgam Okha section from middle gauge to broad gauge. That inauguration had taken place the previous day at Jamnagar. And the governor of Gujarat was the chief guest. The governor had come there and the inauguration had taken place. So the DS and all the branch officers were in Jamnagar. Can I be seen now? Because I can't see myself on the screen.
You are there, very much there.
Okay. Anyway, so the branch officers are not there. I said, "What about the divisional engineer of the other section?" There were 2 divisional engineers. One was towards Jamnagar, one on the other side. So what about him? He said it was very interesting that the governor had come in a special coach. See, normally in those days, for the President of India, we had a full train that whenever the President wanted to travel, that he went in a special train separate with a few coaches, his staff and so on. And a special train ran for the President. For governors, we didn't have a special train, but there was one saloon for the governor in which the governor traveled. The governor had come to Jamnagar and he was to go back by his carriage by the Kirti Express. For some reason, the governor did not travel by that coach. He went back by road. But unfortunately, that coach derailed at Viramgam. Now you can imagine the governor's coach derailing at Viramgam. All the divisional officers who were left in the headquarters had rushed to Viramgam. I'm also told, although I'm not very sure, that when this Griti Express was going, the train following it was the special train carrying the general manager of Western Railway and other senior officers. So the general manager of Western Railway was the first officer on site and gave the first report of what happened in this particular accident. Anyway, the net result was that no divisional officer was in headquarters. But I said, what about the other assistant officers? There must be somebody senior to me. He said, it just happens that all the Group A assistant officers are senior to all the Group B assistant officers. Now, since there was no other Group A assistant officer, he said, you are the senior most, so you are the acting DS today. So I found that very interesting that on my very first day of service, I was the acting DS in Rajkot. Of course, the DS was there otherwise on the division, but not at Rajkot. Incidentally, in those days, we didn't use the terminology Group A and Group B like we do today. They were called Class 1, Class 2, Class 3, and Class 4. It meant the same thing, but for some reason, we kept changing the names. You will find that the railways have been doing this quite often. We keep changing names. For example, what we today call the COM and the DOM, the Chief Operating Manager and the Divisional Operating Manager, used to be called the Chief Operations Superintendent and the Chief Operating Superintendent on the division, the Divisional Operating Superintendent. The Chief Operating Superintendent used to be abbreviated to COPS or COPS. When I was a probationer on Western Railway, the COPS was a very tough guy. So everybody was scared of him. So I remember one of the traffic officers in headquarters had a placard under his glass sheet on his table, which said, I like to feel wanted, but not by the cops. Anyway, so that was my first day in service. I had mentioned the President's Special. The President's Special in the 50s and 60s ran with the steam locomotive. It was only in the late 60s and early 70s that we began to haul the President's Special with the diesel locomotive. Since air travel was not too prevalent in those days and not too common, the President used the special train quite often. I'm not sure, but I understand that the President's Special doesn't exist anymore and has been put in a museum. But anyway, in the 50s and 60s and even 70s, the President's Special was used quite a bit. I understand that Mr. V.V. Giri, when he was president, had used the President's Special very regularly. Anyway, sometime in the 50s, when Dr. Rajendra Prasad was the president, he was traveling by this President's Special from Bombay to Delhi. The rule was that if the president is traveling by the train, the DME of the division, that is the divisional mechanical of the division he was traveling on, traveled on the locomotive, and the DOS of the division, that is the divisional operating superintendent, traveled in the guards van. Now, on this particular day, sometime in around 1955 or 56, the DME of Bombay came onto the footplate, and the train traveled towards Baroda. Then DME Baroda was to come onto the train at Baroda. When the train reached Baroda, there was a message for the DME Bombay that, sorry, the DME Baroda has got occupied or some problem is there. He's not able to come. Could he continue up to Ratlam, where the next DME was to come? Anyway, so the poor chap had no option. He traveled all the way to Ratlam. When he reached Ratlam, there was a message from DME Ratlam to DME Baroda saying, I'm sorry, I can't make it. Can you continue up to Kota, where the next DME was to come? So this DME poor chap traveled all the way to Kota. Now, when he reached Kota, there was a message from DME Kota to DME Ratlam. I got stuck up in some place. I can't make it. Can you travel in my place? So the DME Bombay traveled on a steam locomotive all the way from Bombay to Delhi. Now you can imagine a steam loco is not comfortable at all. In a diesel, you are comfortable. You are sitting comfortably. You can, if it's cold, you can close the windows. If it is warm, you can open the windows. That heat is not there. On a steam locomotive, it is terrible anytime. In summer, because of the heat from the firebox and the general heat that is there, you get totally dehydrated. And plus you have cold and soot coming on to you all the time because the steam loco is open. And in winter, it is even worse because when the firebox door is open, you get a blast of heat from one side and you get a blast of cold air from the other side. It is like having 1 foot in an oven and 1 foot in a refrigerator. That's how bad it is. So anyway, this poor DME reached Delhi station. There's another interesting thing. When the president is traveling or the governor is traveling, you make sure that where the governor's carriage or the president's carriage stops, a red carpet is put on the platform for the governor to get off and or the president to get off and walk on the red carpet. Strict measurements are taken by the locomotive inspector of that division between where the locomotive driver is and where the door of the president's or governor's carriage is. And a sign is put where the driver has to stop exactly so that the door of the carriage is exactly on the red carpet. Most of the president's special drivers were good at it, and they could stop exactly in time so that the carpet was opposite the door. Again, in those days, there were no mobile phones or anything like that. So the poor, you sent telegrams when you did something. So the DME of Bombay sent a telegram to the general manager saying, President's special dead on time. President's coach dead on carpet. DME dead on footplate. I mean, that's how bad it was. Sometime in the middle 70s, I was posted at Abu Road. The governor of Rajasthan had a function in Mount Abu. So he was traveling by the governor's special coach from Jaipur to Abu Road, from where he would go by road to Mount Abu. The Abu Road falls in what is called Sirohi district. The district magistrate of Sirohi had come to the railways and generally told the station master, etc. Diesel shed was indirectly involved, not directly. Mostly it was the traffic people involved. The place where the governor's coach would come, etc., was demarcated. The loco inspector took a measurement between the door of the coach and the driver's window and placed a marker where the locomotive must stop so that the door of the coach is on the red carpet. A carpet was laid out, the train came. Now, normally the train by which the governor was to come, the locomotive used to be short hood leading. This is a YDM4 locomotive. On that day, for some reason, the locomotive was not short hood leading, it was long hood leading, which means the position where the driver should have been shifted by about 15 feet. Normally with the short hood leading, the driver would be towards the front of the locomotive, but with the long hood leading, the driver came to the back of the locomotive. So when the driver stopped exactly on time, he had gone ahead of the red carpet by about 15-20 feet. I happened to be on the platform standing in the background. The train came to a stop and the door of the governor's carriage from where the governor was to get off went beyond this point and came to a stop a little ahead. The governor was Sardar L Singh, who at that time must have been in his 80s. Anyway, the train stopped, the governor's door opened. The governor came to the door, looked around, saw the red carpet a few feet away, and kept standing at the door. I mean, the governor's foot could not land on the normal platform. He had to go onto the red carpet. So he kept standing at the door. The station master saw this and signaled to the driver to back the train. The driver did not know why is the train being backed? But he backed anyway because he got a signal from the station master. When the door came opposite the red carpet, he was given the red signal, but obviously he couldn't stop exactly there. He sort of reshot the red carpet in the other direction. By the time he came to a halt, he was about 5-6 feet off on the other side. The station master then signaled to the driver to move ahead. This happened 3 or 4 times. Each time the driver would overshoot the red carpet. The 4th or 5th time, the governor got fed up. He said, this is too much. When he was crossing the red carpet, he decided to get off. Now you can imagine a person above 80 trying to get off from a moving train, even if it was moving slowly. He stumbled, fell down, and you can imagine all hell broke loose. All the big other district officials and the railway officials who were there helped him up, took him down, and so on. But it wasn't, for a person like me who was not directly involved, it was a very amusing scene. Incidentally, in the priority of train running, the train that has the highest priority is the President's Special. But one thing that even takes priority over the President's Special is an accident relief train moving towards the site of accident. That gets priority, obviously, over all trains. There is one interesting incident of one of my senior colleagues named Ranjit Singh, who used to work on Central Railway. He happened to be senior DME diesel at Katni, and his locomotive was hauling a President Special. That locomotive failed. So obviously he was fired from every side. How could you dare put a locomotive on a President Special which failed? He was a smart person. A few days earlier or a month earlier or so, Apollo 13 had failed, killing 3 astronauts. He said, "Sir, if Apollo 13 can fail, I'm a mere senior DME and this is a mere diesel locomotive." Apparently, he got away with only a very slight warning. Anyway, this is only an introduction to Ranjit Singh. There's a story going around which has been attributed to various people, but I think it applies best to Ranjit Singh. See, when an accident takes place, the accident relief train goes to site, and the DME, the divisional mechanical engineer of the division, is responsible for derailing and clearing operations. Ranjit Singh was on the site. Obviously, the main line was blocked, so headquarters was also worried. Again, in the days when you did not have mobile phones, the way you communicated to an accident site was that in the guard's van, you carried a mobile phone, which you connected to the telegraph line that ran along the track and connected you to the control room. So this had been done, but since it could not be done very close to the accident site, it was a little distance away, and you had to go through a ditch before you reach the this mobile phone. Ranjit Singh was busy doing his work when he got a phone call from headquarters from one of the HODs asking him what the position was. He went and gave the position. Then he came back. After 5 minutes, some other HOD called him and asked him what the position was. Again, he went, gave the position, came back. When this happened 5 or 6 times, he was fed up. So he said, the next person who calls me, I'm going to give him hell. Anyway, sure enough, after a few minutes, a call came again. Ranjit Singh went to the phone, picked up the phone, and all the abuses he gave and said, don't waste my time, let me do my work. The gentleman on the other side said, do you know who's speaking? He said, I don't know and I don't care. He said, I'm your general manager. Ranjit Singh was very fast on his feet. He thought and said, do you know who's speaking? The general manager said, no. He put the phone down and walked away. Now, I don't know if this was done by Ranjit Singh or somebody else. It has been attributed to a number of people. But I think the person who actually would do a thing like this is Ranjit Singh. For those who are hearing and who know Ranjit Singh, will probably agree with me. As I mentioned, I had started my apprenticeship at Jamalpur. So I spent 4 years in Jamalpur then. Later on, in the 80s, I was posted back to Jamalpur, first in the workshop, and then in the training institute. I spent a total of 6 years in Jamalpur then, which means out of my total railway service of approximately 40 years, 10 years was spent in Jamalpur. Now, Jamalpur is a very interesting place. The question often asked is, why was the largest workshop of the East Indian Railway, and perhaps among the first workshops in the country, set up at a place like Jamalpur, which is very remote, not in the main line, quite far away? Why is it set up there? The answer is very simple. It was set up for the simple reason that the first line that was built from Calcutta going towards Delhi went along the river. Today it is called the Sahibganj Loop, but at that time it was the main line. It was the only line that went from Calcutta to Delhi. And Jamalpur fell on that line. Jamalpur had very good climate, it had good water supply, and it had a good tradition of metal workers. It was known for manufacturing pistols and guns and swords and things like that. So because the skills were there, it was a good place. Water supply was good. The workshop was set up at Jamalpur. At that time, when the workshop started in 62, the line only went as far as around Ara. It did not go beyond that. So it was a very good place to set up the thing. There is a very apocryphal story going around as to why the workshop was shifted. Initially, all the offices, that is whether it was the head office, whether it was the locomotive office, whether it was the carriage office, whether it was the operations office, everything was in Calcutta or Howrah. Now, that area got very congested and it was difficult to do any expansion. The story is that the locomotive superintendent one day went for tiffin to a small eating place called Wilson's Coffee Room. When he went there, he found during working hours, 3 of his principal foremen were there having coffee and enjoying themselves, along with 2 or 3 drivers who were also there during duty hours. He was very upset and decided that the locomotive works and the locomotive headquarters must shift from Calcutta and go as far as possible. And since at that time, the line went about as far as Jamalpur, he decided to shift the entire works to Jamalpur. Now, this may or may not have been the actual reason, but it's a story that is going around quite strongly. See, one of the things that the railways does, which on the face of it looks very good, is giving compassionate appointment to the children or the family of any person, any employee who dies in service. He may even die of natural causes, but if he dies in service, then either his wife or his children, one of his sons, depending on their qualifications, etc., is given appointment on compassionate grounds. While this was okay when railways used to recruit in large numbers, if a few people were recruited on compassionate ground. But by the time the 90s came, especially in places like Jamalpur, which were reducing in size, there was no other recruitment taking place except compassionate. So what happened? Because of the compassionate appointments, obviously the persons who came in through such appointments weren't very great. You were getting people who are definitely below the level you would normally have recruited. I can give 2 instances while I was working in the workshop where definitely you got very wrong persons on compassionate appointment. There was one mechanic, a diesel mechanic in the workshop who was very, very sick. He was in the hospital and he was around 59 years and maybe a few months from retirement. He was in hospital and probably would not survive. His son felt that if the guy survives till his retirement age and dies one day later, then he will not get compassionate appointment because then he is not in service. The doctor mentioned that he was very, very sure that this boy had removed the life support system and made sure his father died before he retired. But of course, there was no way of proving it. And going by the convention the workshop had, the son was given appointment. We were all very upset that why we should give him appointment, but then we didn't have any other way of going out of it. There was another case. One of our fitters had expired, normal causes, and we offered appointment to his elder son. His widow came to us and said, please don't give appointment to my elder son, give it to my second son. We said, why? He said, my first son is fairly well qualified, he has studied well, he's going to get a job anyway. My second son is a waster, please give him appointment. So that was the danger in compassionate appointments, that you get the kind of people whom you would normally never have recruited. And especially in shrinking workshops like Jamalpur, where you are doing almost no appointment because steam locos were disappearing. The only appointments you happened to do was on compassionate grounds, so that the kind of people you were getting was certainly not worth it. I'm reminded of another incident from Jamalpur. See, Jamalpur falls in the Munger district of Bihar. Munger district had 2 large employers. One was the ITC factory at Munger, which produced cigarettes. That was one. They were a large employer. And the second, of course, was the railway workshop. The railways had a trade apprentices scheme where you trained apprentices in trades for 3 years. And at the end of that training, they were certified in the particular trade. The trade may be carpentry or welding or mechanic or machinist or whatever. So at the end of it, they were given an appointment. They were given a certificate that you are. Now, in the days when Jamalpur workshop was working to full capacity, almost all the trade apprentices used to be absorbed in Jamalpur workshop itself. But in the early 90s, when I was there, you could not absorb them all because the workshop strength was going down. In fact, you were transferring people out of the workshop to other places. So we had a backlog of people, of trade apprentices who had passed 2-3 years earlier, who had not been given appointment yet in the workshop. One fine day, the managing director of the branch manager of the ITC company came across to us and said that while the cigarette making staff are recruited centrally by ITC, and he gets all his cigarette staff, manufacturing staff from there, for ancillary trades like he needs one welder, he needs one carpenter, he needs one painter, he recruits from the local employment exchange. He says the kind of people he gets from there are totally undesirable, total ruffians, and there's so much political pressure and all etc. on him to recruit certain people that he never gets good people. He was fairly certain that our trade apprentices would be better. We said, fine, do something like a campus recruitment, and from a third year apprentices, trade apprentices, you recruit whomever you want. So their staff came, did a campus interview, and recruited 3 persons and gave them letters of appointment. They're on successful completion of your apprenticeship. You are appointed at ITC. About 5-6 months passed after these apprentices had passed out, but they are not joined in ITC. So the ITC came back again and said they haven't joined. So I had called one of them and I asked him, why aren't you joining? He just kept quiet. I knew the answer, but I sort of insisted, asking him, why aren't you joining? I asked him, is the salary poor? He said, no, the salary is better than the railways. I said, is it that you have to go from Jamalpur to Munger? He said, no, I live in Munger. For the workshop, I'll have to come to Jamalpur. But he said he doesn't want recruitment in ITC. He wants to work only in the railway workshop. Anyway, I kept probing. Finally, the guy says, Saab, wahan kaam karna padega. Translates to, sir, I'll have to work there. Implying that in the Jamalpur workshop, he would not have to work. See, to some extent, that was true, because as the workload was reducing, your staff was becoming more and more surplus, and the work was actually very, very low. But that is the problem in areas like Jamalpur, where the pressure on you for recruitment is very, very high. And you can, in the old days, perhaps you could take in all the people who came to you, but by the time the 80s and 90s came and steam locomotive POH was reducing like hell, it was very, very difficult to recruit all the people who came to you. About 10 years earlier, I had been posted in Ahmedabad as what was called SME construction. SME meant I was senior mechanical engineer in senior scale, but not reporting to a division. I was reporting directly to headquarters. So anyway, and the construction job that I was doing was the conversion of the Sabarmati steam shed to a diesel shed. And also the construction of a new shed at Vatwa for BG locomotives. Anyway, it was a new post. When I went there, there was no office, there was no staff, nothing at all. I had to set up everything myself. With a lot of difficulty, I managed to get a small room in the chief engineer construction's office, and where I set up my office. I recruited one clerk to help me with paperwork, and I recruited one peon. I was given one supervisor from Abu Road who was transferred to Sabarmati. So the entire office consisted of me, one supervisor, one peon, and one clerk. This peon was a local Gujarati boy who worked very hard. He did very good work. A year after that, I was being transferred to Delhi to the railway board. I called him and said, look, you've done 1 year's good service. You're on a temporary appointment. I'll make you permanent before I go. He said, no, sir, I don't want to be permanent. I want to remain temporary. I said, why? He said, he's not interested in working for the railways. He wants to do his own business. He used the word dhandho karna chahta hu. He wants to do his own business. He doesn't want to work in the railways. That is quite common in Gujarat, incidentally. The pressure on you for recruitment in the railways is not high at all. So I said, what business will you do? He says, I'm going to make these cardboard boxes, in which you can put sweets or anything. He wants to make these cardboard boxes. He says, for that, he requires one shearing machine and one press. The cost of that, he gave me a figure, which I don't remember now, is so much. The moment I've saved enough money to buy these items, I'm going to resign from the railways and set up my place. My father's got a small house. He has given me a place to set up this factory. So I said, I did a rough calculation. I said, you've been working for a year. If you save 100% of your salary, then you will be able to, you'll have to work for another year before you get enough money. He says, that's absolutely correct. I'll work for 1 more year, then I'll resign. If I'm permanent, then resignation is not so easy. And but if I'm temporary, then I have no problem. I'll just resign and go home. So then I said, if your entire salary is going into saving for this equipment, how are you living? Are you living on your parents? He says, no, I'm above 21. I cannot live on my parents. I'm working on my own. I said, what do you do? He says, every evening I go home, I buy newspapers and I make envelopes of newspapers. You know, the kind of envelopes you get in the market. I sell enough for making 5 rupees per day, which means about 150 rupees a month, which in those days was enough to take care of your, say, food and so on. I was very impressed by the chap. When I came to Jamalpur, the situation was the opposite. Everybody wanted a job only in the railway workshop. Nobody wanted to do anything else. There was one person who used to hang around my house, say, I'll do anything for you, but give me employment in the railways. I said, look, with the strength of the shop reducing, I can't give you employment, but I can help you. I said, why don't you do this? I gave him the example of my peon in Ahmedabad. You sit and I told him, I've seen these newspaper envelopes in the market. You can make them and sell them. He said, sir, I don't have newspapers. I gave him all the newspapers I had. He said, I don't have a scissors. I gave him a scissor. He said, I don't have glue. I gave him glue. For 2-3 days, he made these envelopes. Then he said, no, sir, this is too much. I want a job in the workshop. I said, you won't get one for the next 5 years. He said, no, I'll wait, but I want a job in the workshop. See, that is the difference between Gujarat and Bihar. I was told about a very interesting trip which one of my colleagues had made when, by the time I left the railways and joined RITES. See, anyone who was classified as a freedom fighter, the railway gives him a free pass to travel by train by second AC. Along with that, one companion can go with this person. What I was told by this gentleman was that he was traveling between Delhi and Bhopal for some work. And he found there was an old lady traveling in the same compartment. She was apparently a freedom fighter, because obviously by the 90s, all freedom fighters were very old. It was an old lady, and she had a companion with her. The next day when he was going back, he found the same old lady sitting with him with with no companion. So he asked her, what is this? I mean, how come you traveled yesterday and today you are traveling back? She says, what does she do? There's a marriage in the family, and the marriage is about 10 days ahead. For the last 10 days, and now for the next 10 days, she's traveling every day between Delhi and Bhopal and carrying one companion with her and leaving him or her in Bhopal. She says, after the marriage is over, she'll travel again for the next 10-15 days, carrying people back and forth. And I thought this is very innovative, and such innovation probably comes only from Indians. One situation where I can certainly say I never really missed a train. Once I came very, very close to it, but still didn't miss it. This is when we were professionals. There were 3 of us. And one of our slightly senior colleagues, Rohit Vora, he was posted in Ajmer. And we were also doing our probationary training in Ajmer. And Rohit Vora and his wife and the 3 of us professionals who were there had planned to go one weekend from Ajmer to Delhi on the Ahmedabad-Delhi Mail. The Ahmedabad-Delhi Mail used to leave from Ajmer station at about 9:05 or so. We were having dinner in Rohit Vora's house. And after that, we traveled in those days by Tonga. We took a Tonga and we traveled to Ajmer station. As we entered the platform, we found the tail lamp of the train. The train had already left. It was the 1st of July, and from that day, the train timings had changed and become about 10-15 minutes earlier. We had not realized that and missed the train. So we were grumbling and coming out of the station when one taxi driver saw us. He said, sir, I will take you to Kishangarh, which was the next station, and we will reach there before the train. We said, fine. So fast negotiations. I forget the exact price. He said, if you take us to Kishangarh, we'll pay you so much. And If you miss the train, then you bring us back without any extra cost. She agreed. He said, I'm very sure we will reach. For those of you who are familiar with Ajmer, there's one hill behind Ajmer called Madar Gate, the Madar Hill. The train goes round that gate, around the hill, whereas the road goes, takes a shortcut and goes through. Now, so obviously, by the time we crossed this Madar Hill, the road had become parallel to the rail track, and we could see the train about half a kilometer behind us. Now, medium gauge trains very rarely do above about 65-70 kilometers per hour, and the taxi was also doing about the same speed. So we remained ahead of the taxi. When we were about 3 or 4 kilometers from Kishingarh station, still well ahead of the train, there was a level class crossing closed for this train. Now, what do? We have no option. We stood. The train went past, the gate opened, we raced to the station, reached the station, ran, and as the train was moving, we were able to jump into the train and catch it. As the train picked up speed, the taxi driver was running along the train, sir, my fare, my fare, my fare. So we threw the money to him from a running train and were able to catch the train. This is the nearest I came to missing a train. I don't think I ever missed a train otherwise. Of course, by this time our reservation had gone, so we spent the time in the corridor, made life difficult for all the other people who were traveling by the train. While I was at the training institute at Jamalpur, I was the professor in charge of the training of probationary officers. Earlier, probationary officers of the mechanical department used to join at Kharagpur for their probationary training. And there was an officer on special duty at Kharagpur who used to organize all their training. But from 1987 batch onwards, it happened to all departments. All probationers went to their training institute, like the mechanical officers came to Jamalpur, and the director at the institute organized their training. So I was the senior professor looking after the training of probationers. I normally used to get officers from Eastern Railway to come and talk to the probationers, to tell them about what is happening. One of these officers was a gentleman called M.K. Ghosh. While most of the officers who came from the head office gave very casual talks, and it was obvious they hadn't prepared for these talks, Mr. M.K. Ghosh had prepared very well. He gave examples of what normally you are never taught. Like he told you what to do in the case of a gherao. He told you what to do in case there is legal action against you. He told you what to do if you have to go to a court of law. It was an excellent talk. In fact, I don't know if the probationers appreciated it, but me as a fairly senior railway officer took notes during his presentation. At the end of it all, he says, but whatever you may be, whatever you may do, ultimately it is common sense that counts more than anything else. And he gave 2 examples. Both the examples are very interesting, and I'll repeat them here. The general manager of Eastern Railway then was a gentleman called G.P. Warrior, who later became chairman Railway Board. While he was doing an inspection of Dhanbad division, and the GM's carriage was attached to a train to go from Dhanbad back to Howrah. It was late at night, about 10 o'clock, when his peon came and the carriage attendant came and told him that, sir, 2 members of parliament have come and sat in your sitting room of that inspection carriage, and they are insisting that they will travel on this to Calcutta. And along with that, if you'll excuse me, there is some work going on in the house above us. I think I'll shift from here. Give me a minute. Sorry about that. Actually, there is some work going on in the house above us. I thought they would not work on Sunday, so I sat in that room, but apparently the work has started now. You can hear some banging even here, but not as much as that room. But anyway, so Mr. Warrior didn't know what to do, because outside on the platform, there were about 30-40 of the followers of these 2 members of parliament, raising slogans and doing the kind of things such followers do. So he realized that it's going to be a problem if it confronts these guys and either asks them to leave or allows them to travel. Either way, it would be a bad precedent. So he did a very smart thing. He sent a note to the station master that he's going on a surprise inspection on another train, and the station master should quietly, without the followers on the platform standing there, detach his coach from the train. So after sending the note, he got off the coach from the other side. There was a goods train on the next platform. He got onto his locomotive and traveled back in the opposite direction. Now, so it happened. The guard of the train whistled, he signaled to the driver moved, and to their horror, all the people standing on the platform and waving their MPs off found that their coach had not moved. Obviously, it was hell to pay. They went to the station master's room and made a noise there. The station master had to ask the general manager. He always had this program to do an inspection. On the other side, a surprise inspection. And he had given instructions before that at the last minute I should detach his coach, which I did. If you had asked him or if you had asked me, I would have told you. Right? I thought this was a very smart way to take care of not setting up a bad precedent and also making sure that nothing happened. Another example of the same Mr. G.P. Warrior was very interesting. Mr. M.K. Ghosh was the chief mechanical engineer of Eastern Railway, and he was trying to create some posts on the division. The financial officer of the FA and CEO did not agree with him and wrote some remarks that said the staff was not justified. In the discussion that they had, the financial officer became very adamant and said under no circumstances he's going to sanction this staff. Anyway, Mr. Ghosh was quite sure that the staff was necessary. So he went to Mr. Warrior, the general manager, and said, "Sir, this is it. I need the staff, but the financial officer is not agreeing to it and not vetting this proposal." Mr. Warrior thought about it and said, "Okay, you leave it to me. I will make sure it gets done." The next day, at the offices those days used to open at 10 o'clock. The next day, at about 10:45 or so, the general manager called Mr. Ghosh and said, "Look, here is your sanction." He said, "Look, you are the general manager, but still, I'm still intrigued. How did you manage to do it so fast?" He says he used psychology. He was aware that most of his divisional officers, except one or two, don't come to the office on time. On time meaning they don't reach at 10. They probably reach at 10:15 or 10:30. So he says that exactly 10 o'clock, he sent a message to the FA and CEO's office. GM would like to see you. At 10:05, he sent another message. At 10:10, he sent a message through his secretary to the FA and CEO secretary that GM wants FA and CEO. So when the FA and CEO finally came at about 10:20 or 10:25, he found about 5 or 6 messages from the general manager saying that general manager wants you. So obviously, he was on the defensive and he came to the GM. The GM had found another case in which the FA and CEO was not on a very strong wicket. He took out that case and gave him a total lecture and ticked him off on that what you are doing here. So when the FNCO was totally defensive, he took out the Mr. Ghosh's case and said, "Look, this case also, why don't you agree?" So he said, "Nothing, not also." He agreed and he signed. What this really shows is that however well trained you might be, however well you may, whatever you may know, whatever you may not know, ultimately it is common sense and what you do at the moment that counts more than anything else. The last story I would like to tell you is the working of the first Python of the Indian Railways. Now, I'm sure this had been done many times before, that you couple 2 rakes together and you run them as a long train. But to the best of my knowledge, the train that was officially called a Python, on that train, I happened to be the driver. Normally, of course, a mechanical officer, he may certify drivers, but it is illegal for him to drive. He cannot drive a locomotive himself. But this was when I was embodied in the Territorial Army, the Western Railway Territorial Army, and we were working on the North Frontier Railway in 1979. When there were a lot of problems taking place on that railway, and we were to help the railway to take care. Now, in those days, the broad gauge line used to go as far as New Bongaigaon. and after that was meter gauge. So the new Bongaigaon yard was a very critical yard where the broad gauge trains used to come, and from there the material used to be put into meter gauge train for further movement. It just happened that on one particular day, our TA unit, a few of us happened to be at New Bongaigaon yard, and our commanding officer was a gentleman named P.S. Chaudhary, who was one of the deputy heads of department on Western Railway. It just happened that the yard was jammed and only one locomotive was available to clear it. Since most of the rakes that came into New Bongaigaon yard were loaded and bulk of the rakes that went out were empties, you had two empty rakes lying over there. So what the NFLU wanted to do was to couple two rakes together, couple them together, make one long rake, and find a path where we did not hit any passenger train and take the train up to New Jalpaiguri. So what the arrangement was, that since they were having a problem with drivers, and that's why the problem had arisen, Territorial Army crew would be the driver and the assistant, while the guard would be a regular NF Railway guard. Incidentally, now the younger people would call the driver a loco pilot, but in those days, drivers were called drivers. Anyway, so we had one TA regular driver as a driver and one regular TA assistant as an assistant, and the NF Railway guard was to come. Now, the clear path started at about 10 o'clock at night. At 5 minutes to 10, the NF Railway guard had not turned up. So the yardmaster, if the guard doesn't come in the next few minutes, then we will miss the path. Mr. P.S. Chaudhary told me, L Singh, you are the driver. And he told me, the driver, to go back and become the guard, the regular TA driver. So the result was that I was the driver, and we had the guard right at our TA driver as the guard. Anyway, I got onto the train. And I had a regular assistant with me, and Mr. P.S. Chaudhary decided to travel on the locomotive along with us. So we left. Fortunately, I had been traveling quite a bit on this section, and I knew the road quite well. I knew where the signals were, I knew where the stations were, and so on. But then anyway, it was an empty train, so there was no problem. We had a very nice, smooth run. All signals were green. We were going at a nice, comfortable speed and getting along. At New Kuch Bihar station, which was the next station, the distant signal was yellow, and we could see far off the home signal was red. I applied brakes. Nothing happened. The signals were approaching. I applied emergency brakes. Again, for some time, nothing happened. And then the train began slowing down, but not fast enough. We were pretty sure that we would cross the home signal at danger. Luckily, in the upper quadrant signaling, the facing points are not immediately after the home signal, as they are in the case of two aspects in signaling. In upper quadrant signaling, you have 4 aspects. So there, the facing points are about 120 meters from the signal. When we were approaching the home signal, we were fairly certain that we would cross it. The speed was slow enough that we were also fairly certain that we would not reach the facing points. Mr. P.S. Chaudhary tells me, switch off your headlight. I said, why? He said, then the station master can't make out that you cross signals. I thought that was pretty smart. Anyway, we finally crossed the home signal by about maybe 10 yards and came to a halt. Wondering why a train of empties, the brake power was so poor. While we were standing there, our driver, who was then acting as guard, came running out. And he said, sir, he has got no vacuum at all. What had happened was that when they had coupled the trains, they had coupled the coupling, but the vacuum hosepipe had not been coupled. In effect, the train brake bar was only 50% of the total train. So we had, when we had started, the New Bongaigaon yard was on a curve. Because it was a very long train, we couldn't see the back of the train. So we had whistled a few times, but there was no way we could see the red signal the guard was giving from the back that he doesn't have vacuum. So we had started anyway because otherwise we would have missed our line. So such adventures do take place. Luckily, nothing untoward happened and we came out of it nice and safe. Gentlemen, I could probably carry on forever because there are many, many stories that can be there. Mr. V. Anand, who is there among the audience, probably has about 10 times the stories that I have, and probably more interesting stories than I have. However, if there are any questions or comments, I'll be happy to answer.
Sir, everybody can unmute now. I have cleared everybody. JL sir, let me start. I mean, this was hilarious. I mean, some of the episodes, I couldn't join you in the laughter because, because I was muted. But this is just amazing. I mean, I've got a cup of coffee next to me which has become cold क्योंकि मैं पीने का time नहीं था sir. It was very entertaining, and we look forward to more of these things. I mean,
I've already asked Mr. Anand to give a talk. Mr. Anand probably has more stories than anybody else.
Definitely.
I will tell you one of the stories that Mr. Anand had told himself long back.
Yes, sir.
See, Mr. Anand,
I would like
Tamilian, I hope I have permission to give the story. I don't know if it is true or not, but it's a good story. See, but he has studied and lived a lot of his life in North India. The result is his name, V. Anand, could be North Indian or South Indian, and his accent was not absolutely South Indian. So you couldn't tell whether he was a North Indian or a South Indian.
His Hindi is excellent, so no problem.
So he got posted in Chennai, then Madras.
Yeah.
And on 26 January or something, he was asked to make a speech. He made the speech in Tamil.
Yeah.
So his Baba Babu came to him and said, "Sir, for a North Indian, you speak wonderful Tamil." But he said, "I'm not a North Indian. I'm Venkateshwar Anand. I'm a Tamilian from South India."
Yeah.
He said, "Then, sir, I'm very sorry. You speak very bad Tamil." So, please, you must ask Mr. Anand to give a talk. Such stories can take 2 hours and they won't finish.
I'll certainly do that. But coming to your talk, which was very, very entertaining, the time just flies.
Yeah.
But I would like to make 1 or 2 comments. The senior accounts officer, Jabalpur division, he, with respect to the finance officers, they relied more on the notings made by their subordinates. And the subordinates were really, really very good. They were trained and they had to pass several different examinations. So the DME told this guy, he says, I'll get a proposal made, which you will pass and you will have egg on your face. Do that. So the DME prepared proposal. Those days we had the system that goods drivers used to go to sleep in the running rooms, and they had to be called by sending a book. And the book was delivered by a guy called the call boy. So the DME put up a note. He said, "Sir, in the recent recruitment, there are a lot of lady assistant drivers have been recruited. And since we'll have separate running rooms, and obviously we can't send a male call driver to wake them up. And so it is proposed to recruit 40 call girls." It didn't pass through. And then it went to the sanctioning authority, which was the divisional superintendent. He called the DME. He says, "Are you really going to recruit call girls?" So it's just a challenge I threw. There's also the story of, we have a St. John's ambulance, and they needed some material for, they needed some musical instruments for their band. It was a very good band, but they didn't have the proper musical instruments. So one of the assistant engineers, he made a proposal for transporting water. He said it's the summer season and we need some water to be carried. So I need so many pipes and drums. So duly sanction was obtained for pipes and drums, but they bought those bagpipes and they bought some drum. So the St. John's ambulance got their ambulance. Now coming to President Special, That will require a big separate session. But President Giri was very fond of traveling by his special trains, and he came to inaugurate the second Rajdhani Express, which was all lined up and it was to be flagged off from ICF. So first problem was that he could not climb up the steps. So a special ramp was constructed, very long ramp we had to negotiate and get to them. It was very nice. I was at the tail end. He was being shown around by the general manager. When he came to the pantry car, it was a nice air-conditioned pantry car, and we showed off the freezer and we showed off the coolers and the refrigerators and all. And so he asked, we had a sort of live thing. We had waiters all in their best uniforms. And he asked one of the waiters, hey, can you give me a gold spot? Gold spot was a popular orange drink. The waiter opened the fridge and handed it over to the president. Boy, oh boy, all hell broke loose. I was told you have breached security. How can your waiter give an orangeade to the president himself? I said, sir, I can assure you he had no plans to assassinate the president. Please let him go. It was a serious breach of... when we were taking the Shah of Iran through some air-conditioned coaches and all, suddenly the lights failed. And for a moment before the generator kicked in, there was a stunned silence. And when the lights came on, we found that the Shah's personal bodyguard had taken up positions all around him. And they towered above him and they were pointing lethal weapons at us. Otherwise, the trip was okay. The same gentleman who said the president's special dead on carpet, DME dead on plate was subsequently promoted, and he was in the Western Railway headquarters. Now, Integral Coach Factory, where I was working, ICF, was committed to giving a great deal of spare parts. One of the important spare parts was the screw coupling. You know, it's a long rod with the thread. And the threading, it's a special type of thread called a knuckle thread, which ICF could not make in large numbers. So ICF told all the assembled officers that, look, we can't give spare screw couplings, but can you use the spare rods, the coupling rods? So this gentleman replied, he said, sir, you give us the coupling, we'll do the screwing. Somebody wanted to know about how to handle the unions. There was one divisional superintendent, Sialda, who was also a territorial army officer. So I'll let you have his name. He was my mentor, Satish Chandra Mishra. So he was Geraud. You know, Geraud means he was completely surrounded and he was confined to his office. The usual Zulm Chol Bena, Hamari Mange Puri Karo, whatever that may be. So he quietly slipped into his territorial army uniform and came out from another exit. And with this swagger stick, he said, Tamash bin, bhag jao, yahan se ek jao, bhag jao. You know, the army uniform is still respected. And Mr. Mishra was dressed in a full colonel's uniform with all the Shok Chakra and the stars. So that was one way of getting out of. But one has to, as they say, think out of the box or think on one's feet. We had a case where the one trade union, they geared me and the chief the divisional medical officer, because one of their workers was hurt in some fracas, nothing to do with the railways, but his mangled remains were carried to the, and they demanded that the railway protective force, the officer concerned should be placed under suspension, and they will. I didn't know how to get out of this, so the best way to disperse a crowd is to ask for a donation. So I said, look, we'll do that in due course. I can't place him under suspension for general manager's sanction. So meanwhile, please save your colleague. We don't have enough blood. He's bleeding profusely. We need lots of blood, and blood is available only at Belgaum, 24 kilometers away, and we need money. So half the crowd melted away. Almost all, when it came to giving a donation, suddenly the crowd disappeared. And then for good measure, the medical officer and we donated blood, and that sort of saved a very nasty situation. Anyway, I could go on and on, but jail has promised that I'll have a session of my own. So maybe one of these days I can do with even more interesting stories. Thank you.
I think your session will have to be a 3-hour session.
No, we can have it on 3 successive. There will have to be somebody will have to sort of, ask exercise the gelatin and cut me short.
Abhimanyu Arora wanted to speak. He put up his hand. Please unmute yourself. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you very much, JL sir. I just put the symbol for clapping actually.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. JL sir, even today, what you did between Ajmer and Kishangarh on a taxi gets done between Kurla terminus and Panvel. That if you miss a train here, then the taxi guy who's ready, ki chalo aapko leke jata hu, and you'll not miss your train because that train goes via Thane and whether the taxi will
I know it takes a roundabout route.
Yeah.
My elder sister, she missed the Udyan Express.
Yes.
Then at Panvel, not Panvel, she got off she took a taxi all the way from VT to, I think, Karjat or someplace. Got up there.
Okay. Yeah. So, Udyan Express is little,
yeah, but the story of my batchmate and how he eloped with the general manager's daughter will have to wait for myself.
Right, sir. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. If there are any other comments, questions? Right, then I'd like to thank Jael for a wonderful hour-long chat, some very, very interesting and amusing stories, and I hope all of you have enjoyed it. I certainly did. So thank you, Jael, very much.
Pleasure was mine. In fact, while Anand was talking, I remember at least 3-4 more stories that are equally interesting, but that I will give as comments when he gives his talk.
Yes.
All right.
Sir, Vinu sir, please share the recording. And
Okay.
I'll finish the our annual session, the conference recording. It will take me about another 15 days because for every hour of recording, it takes me 1.5 hours to finish it. So I don't have that much of free time right now, but it will be done. Not a problem.
Fine. Take your time.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Jael, once
Bye,
more.
everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Goodbye, everyone. Bye. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye, Warren. Bye, Vinu.
Bye. Bye.